Let's dive right into this explainer, where we're unpacking a massive, game-changing Supreme Court of India ruling. For decades, the legal system has literally struggled to figure out the financial worth of someone who doesn't earn a traditional paycheck. Well, today, we're exploring exactly how a groundbreaking case completely rewrote that rulebook, fundamentally changing how we value the invisible, unpaid labor that actually powers our entire economy.
Because really, how do you put a price tag on a mother's love and labor? It's a profound question, right? And it's one courts have wrestled with for years whenever tragedy strikes a family. You see, when a salaried earner passes away, calculating compensation is super straightforward. You just look at their pay stubs. But how on earth does a judge calculate the economic loss of someone whose daily labor, the cooking, the cleaning, the caregiving, the endless household management is done entirely for free, just out of familial love?
Well, the ultimate answer the Supreme Court of India reached in June 2026 was a minimum monthly valuation of 30,000 rupees. But let me tell you, the 25-year interactive journey to get to this seemingly simple number, it is absolutely fascinating, it's heartbreaking, and ultimately, it's completely revolutionary for jurisprudence.
Section 1. 25-year fight for justice. To really grasp this macroeconomic ruling, we kind of have to start with the human cost of a legal system that just couldn't figure out how to value a woman's daily life. Back in November 2001, a 33-year-old mother of three named Reshma was tragically killed in a motor accident in Haryana. She was a deeply dedicated homemaker, so after her passing, her grieving husband and three young kids sought compensation from a motor accident claims tribunal. And, they weren't just grieving the loss of a mother and a wife, they were suddenly completely devoid of the literal engine that kept their household running day in and day out.
And this family endured an agonizing 25-year legal ordeal just to have Reshma's daily contributions recognized. It's wild to think about the timeline of events here. It took until 2023 for the initial tribunal to award just 2.42 lakh rupees. Then, the High Court bumped it to 8.43 lakh the very next year. It literally took a quarter of a century and an appeal to the highest court in the land in 2026 to finally arrive at a fair valuation of nearly 63 lakh rupees.
The hurdles this family faced along the way were just immense. Court files were literally destroyed in a tragic fire at the High Court, which forced the entire process to stall out while records had to be rebuilt from scratch. But honestly, the biggest hurdle was just an incredibly outdated legal system. The initial courts actually viewed a homemaker's income as being inherently less than that of an unskilled daily wage laborer. It was just a massive systemic failure of imagination when it came to understanding the true value of domestic work.
Section 2. The invisible economic engine.
So the crucial takeaway here is that Reshma's story isn't just one isolated legal case. It actually represents a massive, totally uncompensated economic engine that is running the entire country. When we look at data from the 2019 Time Use Survey, we see this staggering, incredibly one-sided reality where women are shouldering more than double the unpaid caregiving responsibilities. Women aged 15 to 59 are putting in over 7 hours a day on unpaid domestic work, and men, fewer than 3 hours. Plus, keep in mind, women undertake 2.6 times more of this caregiving work even when they're also holding down formal income-generating jobs outside the home.
And this inequality builds up to an almost unfathomable scale globally. We are talking about 16 billion individual hours devoted to unpaid domestic work and care. 16 billion hours every single day. Think about that for a second. If you actually tried to pay for all that labor at standard market rates, it would completely bankrupt the global economy. Yet, just because it happens inside the home, traditional economics just shrugs and writes it off as a zero.
But when you add all those hours up, women's unpaid caregiving is estimated to contribute a massive 15 to 17% of India's total GDP. 15 to 17%. Yet it remains completely unacknowledged in traditional economic measures. The Supreme Court specifically pointed to this exact paradox. We are literally talking about nearly a fifth of the nation's entire economic output existing completely off the books.
There's this brilliant observation from British economist Sir Cecil Pigou from way back in 1920 that perfectly highlights this absurdity. He basically said that if a man marries his housekeeper or his cook, the national dividend is diminished. It shows how a job is valued when it's paid, but it instantly becomes economically invisible the second it's done out of familial love. If you pay someone to clean your house, boom, it boosts the GDP. If you marry them and they do the exact same work for free, the GDP technically shrinks. It's literally an economic glitch, and the courts have finally decided it needs fixing.
Section 3. 3 Theories of Valuation.
So this brings us to a really complex puzzle. How exactly does a court of law calculate a monetary value for something that society considers priceless? You can't just pull a number out of thin air, right? Well, over the years, economists and legal scholars have proposed a step-by-step breakdown using three main theories. The first method they explore is the opportunity cost. This one essentially asks, what income did this person sacrifice by choosing to stay home instead of pursuing an outside career? Say a trained teacher decides to stay home to raise her kids, her opportunity cost is the teacher's salary she gave up. But courts actually found this pretty tricky, mainly because it inherently undervalues people who maybe didn't have access to higher education in the first place, completely ignoring the actual physical labor they do at home.
The second approach is called the replacement cost. This one asks how much it would literally cost to hire a team of professionals at market rates to replace all the diverse daily tasks a homemaker performs. Think about it. If the homemaker suddenly goes on strike, you'd have to hire a chef, a cleaning service, a tutor for the kids, a nurse for the elderly parents, and a household manager just to run the budget. Some estimates show that hiring out all these specific roles at market rates could easily cost 50,000 to 60,000 rupees every single month.
Then there's the third theory, the partnership method. This one treats a marriage as a true 50-50 economic joint venture, completely regardless of who brings home the actual paycheck. The argument here is that the only reason the earning spouse can focus entirely on their career, totally stress-free, is because the homemaker provides this protective bubble of support, managing literally everything else. Therefore, the income generated belongs equally to both partners. Now, before these modern theories really gained traction, the default legal framework was honestly pretty bleak. The second schedule to the Motor Vehicles Act arbitrarily valued a non-earning spouse at a mere 1/3 of the earning spouse's income. It was a deeply, deeply flawed benchmark that just automatically relegated the homemaker to a secondary, much less valuable status. And that brings us right to the absolute climax of this whole legal journey.
Section 4, the historic Rs. 30,000 ruling.
Let's dive into exactly how the Supreme Court of India finally shattered those outdated precedents in 2026. Faced with this deeply unequal system and 25 years of grueling litigation by Reshma's family, the Supreme Court realized they had to redefine exactly what a homemaker brings to society. Tweaking those old formulas just wasn't going to cut it anymore. They needed a fundamental shift in vocabulary and legal philosophy. So what exactly is the legal value of a nation builder?
Well, the Supreme Court solved this by taking three definitive step-by-step actions. First up, they explicitly rejected the old patriarchal myth that homemakers are somehow unproductive dependents. In fact, they flipped it, noting that it's actually the working members who are totally dependent on the homemaker. Second, they created a brand new legal compensation category called loss of domestic care. And finally, they established a firm financial floor, declaring that 30,000 rupees a month is the absolute minimum basic standard income to be used for calculation. This finally put an end to courts treating homemakers worse than daily wage earners. There's this incredibly powerful quote from Justice Sanjay Karl that says, "Homemakers are nation builders, building blocks for the nation's road to holistic progress." This represents a massive shift in judicial sensibilities. It takes the domestic worker from being perceived as a dependent and elevates them to being recognized as the very foundation of the country's progress. The court formally recognized that a mother isn't just raising children. She is actively developing the human capital that builds the entire nation's economy and its social fabric. And this newly established loss of domestic care framework ensures that compensation actually encompasses the full spectrum of a homemaker's invaluable contributions. Because it's not just sweeping and cooking, right? It's the day-to-day household management. It's the loss of maternal support and child rearing. It's the intense caregiving for adult children and elderly parents. It's the psychological insulation they provide. It's creating that vital emotional support and social capital that allows the rest of the family to actually thrive in the outside world.
Ultimately, by increasing Reshma's family compensation from a meager 8 lakhs to over 62 lakhs, the court fundamentally rewrote the social status of domestic labor across the entire legal system. As the court noted, the terminology itself has evolved. We've moved away from the restrictive term housewife, we embraced homemaker, and now the Supreme Court hopes the title will simply be nation builder.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. Getting a wage applied to housework by the Supreme Court is a massive, hard-fought legal victory. But as many sociologists point out, finally being valued only after a tragedy strikes is a bitter irony. The true challenge ahead of us now is taking this judicial recognition and actually translating it into our daily lives. While a 30,000 rupee baseline legally recognizes this value in death, how can society fundamentally redistribute this unequal burden in life? How do we balance those 16 billion hours of unpaid labor so that equality isn't just a ruling in a courtroom, but a lived reality within our own homes?